Good morning. Just wanted to share the second part of the devotion today. I was reading from 1 Samuel in the previous one, just talking about how God had called Saul to be the king over his people, even though it wasn't a decision that God particularly wanted to make, because they were desperate to have a king. God chose Saul, even though he was from the weakest clan, even though when it was time for him to stand up and say, "I am your king," they found him hiding among the baggage. And just saying actually about the fact that we can often be like that when we feel like God is going to use us. We give him all the reasons why he shouldn't, as if that's going to put him off. And I love the story of Samuel. I love right from the beginning when his mother Hannah can't have a child, and so she says to God, if you give me a child, I'm going to give him back to you. And Samuel then became this incredible prophet for God. She was able to bear this child, but then give him over to God to be used as God's mouthpiece. And just in 1 Samuel chapter 12, there's this moment where Samuel's actually saying goodbye. He's moving on now. He's getting too old. And he talks about to Israel about the fact that they've let God down in so many different ways. And yet he says this in verse 23 of chapter 12. He says, "As for me, far be it from me that I should sin against the Lord by failing to pray for you. And I will teach you the way that is good and right. But be sure to fear the Lord and serve him faithfully with all your heart. Consider what great things he has done for you. Yet if you persist in doing evil, both you and your king will be swept away." Now, I love prophets in the Old Testament. They had a lot of harsh things to say to God's people, but they kind of dared not to, because it was either a choice of being popular or being obedient to God. And I know which one I would choose. I would always choose to be obedient to God rather than being popular with mankind. But I love the fact that even though he has all this grief with Israel, he says, "You know what? I'm still going to pray for you." And I think that's a bit of a lesson for us, that even if we go through difficult times with people, we say, it's actually, I'm going to be sinning against God if I don't pray for you, if I don't commit you to him, if I don't believe that God can use you in every possible way. And then he says this thing, he says to fear the Lord. He wants the people to fear the Lord, serve him faithfully, and consider the things he has done for you. Now, I've talked about this before, but I think it's such a powerful thing. Remember what God has done for you. I was talking to somebody just on Sunday about the fact that God has done so many things for her, and I was saying it's so important to journal these things down so that when you head into a difficult time again, you can read back on what God has done, how you might have felt anxious and yet God came through for you, how you might have been worried that the provision wasn't there and yet God came through for you. And as we write it down and we remind ourselves and we tell the next generation and the next generation, these are the things that God has done for us, it puts us on a firm footing so that we don't get to that immature state again where if we're going through a difficult time, we say, "Oh, God, why am I in this situation? What are you going to do? What if you don't come through for me?" Actually, we can read back and say, I can see what God has done. And this was what Samuel was encouraging the Israelites here with his farewell. He was saying, I'm going to pray for you, but here's your greatest gift right now is if you remember what God has done for you in the past, it will put you on good footing. And then he finishes it off saying, but if you persist in evil, both you and your king will be swept away. So in one sense, it was an encouragement. In another sense, it was a warning saying, actually, stick with God, because at the end of the day, that's the only way you're going to keep safe. So my encouragement for you today is back from the first devotional. If God's going to use you, step up and say to God, I'm available. I might not feel like I've got everything I need, but I'm going to step forward and be there to work for God. And the second thing really is just that sense of it's important to pray for each other, and it's also important to remember what God has done, because that's the only way we're going to be able to really see change happen in our own lives when we're struggling with our own feelings and our own insecurities. Knowing that God has called us, knowing that God is going to provide. If God's given you a vision, he'll always have the provision. He'll always have what is needed. So God bless you, and remember those things.